Good morning. How is everyone? Good. So while we're getting set up here, I'll say, as she mentioned, I'm Andi Campbell. I'm the head of HR for LAZ Parking. We're a little guy in comparison to some of the folks you saw up here in terms of who we are as a company, but I'll give you just a one sentence for those of you who don't know who LAZ is. We park cars. We probably parked one of yours, especially if you're here in Dallas. And so we have over 14,000 employees across 30 states, over 2,000 locations. And so that's really all I'll share about LAZ for now, because that's obviously not what our session is about, but just to give you some context of who we are. One of the biggest things that drives our well-being strategies is that our employees are across all of these different locations, sometimes in remote parking lots and or parking garages where they don't have access to technology, they don't have work-issued phones or email addresses, and so reaching these folks is quite a feat, as some of you may have a similar type of workforce. And so driving well-being strategies for these folks is not as easy as it would be if everyone was in one location or had some kind of technology. Now layer that with the fact that I'm kind of a non-traditional HR leader. I didn't grow up in HR. As the head of HR for a large company, I actually grew up in talent and org development. So I have a totally different lens on the world, and actually took this job, and I'll never forget saying that the one thing I didn't know anything about when they wanted me to do this job is benefits. So fast forward now, a number of years later, I feel pretty confident in what we're doing, although listening to some of these folks, I'm like, there's always something to learn. So, all of that together makes the recipe or the ingredients for a recipe that's the same as what you're all cooking, right? We're all trying to do the same thing, which is take care of our people, but and certainly lower our costs. But at the end of the day, I have maybe a different set of ingredients than some of the folks you just heard, and so that's where I'm coming from today. I'll just kind of tell you one last quick story to level set a little bit. So back in 2015, I had a chance to go on this crazy yoga retreat into Bali. I know you're thinking kind of eat, pray, love of me, but it didn't end that way. But anyway, so I'm in Bali, and the first couple of days, I'm trying to connect to my email, like anyone tries to do these days. We're trying to connect to our email. We're trying to check in with our people. And, between the spotty Wi-Fi and the time difference, I'm thinking, wow, I'm not making very much progress here. Nobody's calling my hotel asking me the important questions that I thought they obviously needed me to answer, as many of you can experience. And so that began for me over the last 5 years, a personal journey in digging into the relationship between employee and employer, and particularly how we feel about our jobs and how that might be masking some of the things that we need to be addressing in our health and well-being. So this is personal for me, the work that we do. It's also obviously professional, because I'm in a role where everyone tells me to stop spending as much money as we spend on healthcare, which I'm sure you guys can all relate to, and take better care of our people. So that's the professional side. And I think it's patriotic, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're in a health crisis in our country. We heard a lot about healthcare being an issue. I believe as employers, responsibility to do better in giving our employees the opportunity to at least be educated in what's going on, and that's about bringing our humanity back into business. So from a level setting perspective, that's where we are. I'm going to share with you a little bit from a different lens how you could look at engaging your employees through well-being strategies from the lens of org development and talent, which we don't really generally marry. The idea of your talent departments or your training departments, they're usually on their own, doing their own thing, and then you've got your benefits departments doing their own thing. So what we've done at LAZ is begun to bridge the gap, and I'm going to share a little bit about that story. From my lens, I believe that the biggest mistake, or one of the biggest mistakes companies make related to their benefits strategy, is that we don't integrate as well as we could between our culture initiatives, our benefits initiatives, and our training initiatives. In many cases, they're different departments led by different leaders, some of them bubbling up eventually to a CHRO or, like me, a head of HR, but at the end of the day, they kind of get treated as separate entities because in and of themselves, they're all really complicated. I think you guys would agree with that. They're all a really, really complicated different set of things. And so often we don't think strategically in how the three components or the many components of HR could come together in driving better overall well-being strategies for our employees. And so that's what we've set out to do at LAZ, which, again, totally different kind of lens. So this kind of came up for us as this idea that it's all just behavior change. You guys agree, right? It's all just behavior change. If we want somebody to park a car more safely, if I want somebody to drive a better development career conversation with their employee, or if I want somebody to go to the doctor more often, am I not just trying to change their behavior in every case, right? And so if we can look at the lens of our well-being strategies from a place of just behavior change, oversimplify, not to say that it's simplified, but oversimplify the concept, it might give you a different filter to look at the strategies that you're putting in place. I believe there's so many different tools and resources that are out there. We heard about some of them, some of these organizations are using. Some of those aren't cost effective for the smaller employers. I don't know if any of you guys can relate to that, but you want to bring in more tools, but they're telling you to spend less money. And that's often a bit of a challenge. So I do think that there's an opportunity for us to look at from the lens of how do we change behavior in an entirely different kind of way. So the journey for us started separately, actually, and I've only recently begun to integrate, so I'm going to talk about each one, and then I'm going to bring them together. So we had our LAZ University, which, programs, all of our LAZ University programs, similar to maybe some of the training programs you have in your organizations, corporate university, obviously not the topic for today, but we had a lot going on. Our LAZ University, we'll call that leadership development. How do we develop and deploy our leaders in our markets, particularly in our locations that are remote and where employees don't have access to a lot of information? And then we had what we call our Be Healthy, Be Whole campaign, or we have our Be Healthy, Be Whole campaign, which is our well-being campaign for our LAZ enrolled employees, or employees who are enrolled in our health benefits. So big part of our Be Healthy, Be Whole campaign is around self-care, employee self-care, and we believe that self-care starts with leader. If I take care of myself, then you take care of then I can encourage other people to do it. Put your own oxygen mask on first. That's really where our campaign starts. So we had kind of two paths happening in parallel. So let me dig in first to our benefits campaign for just a minute here. So a number of different things we were doing on the well-being side. But what we knew, like many of you, and just looking at the numbers, this is maybe even small in comparison to what some of you are spending, but for a privately owned company, spending upwards of 10, getting up to closer to $12, $15 million in healthcare is an issue. And so obviously it's something that we all wanted to solve. So there's a business need for us to spend more money. We already all know that. So we dug a little bit into our data and we realized that, well, nearly 50% of our claims, we're self-funded, by the way, so nearly 50% of our claims are coming from our small few high claimants. So that's maybe for us an average per year 25, 26, 30 claimants. And then the other half of our claims, so about $5 to $7 million a year, we're coming from really things that we all know prevention can drive down cost. So we decided, okay, let's target that piece and stop setting unrealistic expectations that we're going to drive down our total overall spend. Because I think part of it, and this is where we can step back as leaders in our organizations and say, well, this is an opportunity for me to think a little differently and present expectations to our, in my case, our CEO, to say, well, we're not going to change the trajectory of 10 million or 15 million. We're going to change the trajectory of this amount, and this is why. And I think we don't always do that because we're getting caught in the vortex of spend less, spend less. So our wellness philosophy at LAZ is people over profits. That's actually our philosophy in general is people over profits. I'm lucky to work for an organization where we mean that, and I have countless experiences that support that, which I'm lucky in the fact that I work already in a place that knows people over profits is our model. So a few of the things that we believe, and these are some of the things I'm going to kind of dive into what we did about it, is that we believe inflammation fuels dis-ease or disease. We believe that employers need to provide education for people to be better consumers of healthcare, using the word that I just learned is taboo, so I won't use patience from our last conversation. That individualized coaching really does move the needle, and we believe that individualized coaching moves the needle, that being well isn't just diet and exercise, which all of us know, and that the body knows what it needs, and we just need to give people more quiet time. So all of this is grounded in the idea of intuitive thinking, and the intuitive experience, and giving people an opportunity to get honest with themselves about what they need. We believe that the body can heal itself. So if that's our model, what did we do about it? So we created something that's called the Whole Life Project. Now, bear in mind what I said earlier, we're a much smaller organization than some of those that you heard from earlier, and so we had a lot less money to work with, which may resonate with some of you. So we were like, well, how can we come up with a well-being strategy that's rooted in the ideas that we just shared, trying to move the needle on, in our case, what's a lot of money, and then take that and think about, well, we also have no budget. So that's an issue, and what are we going to do about it? So we came up with this concept called the Whole Life Project, and essentially it was grounded in the idea, or is grounded in the idea, that we have group education, we have individualized coaching, we have testing, because we have this theory that food, that inflammation fuels disease, and we've seen the data for that. We look at biometrics, and we have whole life programming. And what we did is we went out and said, who's interested in being part of our pilot? So we went out, offered people to sign up for this pilot. We had them sign a form committing them to the whole project, which was going to be a 6-month pilot, and to the requirements in the program. We assumed we'd have some attrition. We ended up probably seeing 75 to 80% of the people complete the full 6 months. We benchmarked them at the beginning with some biometrics. We had them take a food inflammation test as part of the project, and we met individually with each employee and set goals. I'm going to step back and just clarify. We have 2 wellness coaches who we've hired exclusively full-time. And so they work directly on our team, and we're not outsourcing our coaching. And we've been able to fund the salaries for those employees by showing a decrease in the cost of our claims in the last few years, and the cost of our administrative costs and varying other things that we've been doing to negotiate our pricing. So we believe it's important that, although I'm not suggesting that the third-party wellness providers that are out there who are offering coaching are not good, because that's not what I'm saying, but for we wanted the opportunity for our employees to really work with a LAZ employee who understood that people over profits is the model, and that we're going to do everything it possibly takes to be able to support them, up to and including sometimes people saying, my manager said I couldn't go to coaching, and then if they're willing to allow that person, the coach, to say who they are, obviously we're mindful of people's privacy, then I, as the head of HR, could even get involved and call a leader and say what's happening. And that's how we're creating this culture of well-being. So then we assigned them into small groups, we put them through some education sessions, and then of course we did the biometric testing at the end to see how we did. And we also had another set of lifestyle factors that we were measuring, not exclusively biometrics. And you can see on the board, this is some of the data that we saw. The lifestyle factors are along the bottom, and everything from reducing sugar to improving diet to getting better sleep to feeling happier, then of course to the things that matter in biometric for cholesterol, waist circumference, those types of things. So overall we saw some really great data, and we were like, wow, we think we're onto something. So we believed that the work that we were doing made a lot of sense, and it wasn't expensive. We ended up negotiating a little deal with the Everlywell test that's out there. I don't know if anyone saw it on the food inflammation. Really, our only hard cost is the cost of the salaries for our wellness coaches and the cost of putting together the food inflammation testing. So we saw some really great data, and we were like, okay, we think we're onto something here. So now I'm going to say, as I said earlier, there was 2 kind of paths happening in parallel. So now I'm going to step back and tell you a little story, and now I'm going to connect the paths. So we'll call this gal Marlene. I was coaching a gal named Marlene, and now to be clear, I'm not a wellness coach, although I am a certified health coach. I'm not wellness coaching our employees, because that would be against all of the privacy laws that exist. And so I was doing having a career coaching conversation with an employee, which I spend a lot of time doing one-on-one coaching with a lot of our leaders. And I was chatting with her one day during our session. We were working on her building her confidence in front of a room. We have 83% of our population is men, so a lot of the women in our organization struggle with finding their voice in a room full of powerful men. And so I was working with her on that, and I was picking up some vibes from her where it was just like, something doesn't feel right. This isn't just about this. And I noticed that she was biting her nails. So being in the moment that I was in, I just said, hey, what's going on with you physically? I feel like something's off. And let's take a step back from all this and just, how are you? Like, what's happening? So through the course of that conversation, it turns out that she had been having headaches, she wasn't sleeping well, there was a lot of what we would consider to be well-being factors that could be potentially the source of some sort of disease and eventually potentially going to be a claims cost for us. And of course, so I'm having this conversation with her, and then over the course of a few different sessions, she was able to make a correlation between the time that she was having these experiences, like headaches, lack of sleep, anxiety, and the times that she was putting herself or having to be in the position where she was in front of a room of people and having to drive results. And she made this connection through me just asking questions through the process and being present, mindful in the moment and noticing what was going on. And I kind of had this aha moment, which was like, I'm not responsible for wellness coaching, right? I'm the head of HR. I'm in here with a career conversation. But it was like this mind-blowing kind of turning point for me where I realized, like, holy moly, but that wasn't the word I thought to myself. Holy moly, like there's this thing that we're really onto, and that's what all these people in the world are talking about these days, right? The Brene Browns, the Arianna Huffingtons, the Dan Harrises, who are talking about, meditation and vulnerability and shame and getting honest and being authentic and like all this stuff that everyone's talking about, and the connection. And now I'm actually seeing the connection in the workplace. And so that's when I realized that we really do need to make a connection between the development of our leaders and our well-being processes, practices, and initiatives, or else we're not going to be able to continue to see results. Eventually, you put in so many, programs that are recommended by a health broker or your health insurance company and all these other things, but, at the end of the day, like this for us this is about people. And we are so busy looking at the data, the vendors and looking at what's going on, that we're forgetting that these are people who have intuitive processes in place who know what they need. And if as leaders, we can just slow down and teach our leaders to spend more quality time asking good questions of our people, we will probably see a lot of different results. Obviously, this conversation is about well-being, but as you can imagine on the talent side, you can make a connection to bringing this humanity back into work and how that might change the trajectory of the work that you do for talent development and performance and retention and all these other dynamics and metrics that are important. So in parallel, as I was mentioning before, we had this model of what we were doing for teaching our leaders. Foundation, it's our foundation for all of our talent development initiatives. It's just a basic competency model, inspirational leadership, authentic and effective communication, results-driven leadership. So we have this foundation, and in it, I went back. So when I went through this process with this Marlene gal, then I went back and I was like, what is missing from our set of leadership competencies that we could tie to well-being that could completely change the trajectory of the work that we're doing? And so that was the first place I started. So if I were recommending something to you, I would say, do you know what your leadership competencies are? And if so, do they include anything about helping people get honest with their own health and well-being? And if they don't, what can you do about that to help drive a different kind of change? Because most talent groups or training groups are probably some set of core competencies to build their training programs or leadership development programs within your organizations. So there's definitely a really strong correlation there. So all of our, now especially all of our leadership development programs through our LAZ University program or programs are rooted in this idea of letting your gut be your guide. Like, how do you let your gut be your guide? From everything from what do you need in order to feel whole, to what do you think that employee needs in order to feel healthy and whole, to what's the best decision here about this performance situation, or do you think that person's in the right job, and if so, why, and if not, why not? And what do you think this person has in terms of potential, and everything that goes along with it, day to day in managing people, letting people let their guts be their guides. And the more we do that, the more results we're seeing improve in terms of all of the data that we're looking at. So our manager certification programs, we have monthly coaching clinics, we have an elite coaching program, and all of these things are rooted in the foundation on the LAZ University side that, what do you need in order to live or work more purposefully with the alignment to be healthy, be whole, which is what do you need in order to feel more whole? So I'm going to stop there for a moment and what questions about what I've covered so far can I answer before I switch into a different piece of this? Hello. This is the quietest group of people I've ever worked with here, so I'll just take about 2 or 3 questions quickly, and then I can move to the next section.
So you mentioned that your workforce is 80-ish% male, and then also employing the health coaches within LAZ. So one of the challenges we have is employee receptivity to being managed by their peers. So can you speak to how you overcame that in order to engage, no offense to the males in the room, but a traditionally difficult to engage population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and ironically, our 2 wellness coaches are women. So that's an even more interesting dynamic. So, at the end of the day, what we've done is now go back to, I was saying earlier, my lens sometimes is, more often than not, is like this org development lens and the I have my background is organizational psychology. That's where my master's is. So I'm really about like how do humans behave in the workplace. And so one of the things I've done with all of our programs, well-being management and wellness coaching included, has been to create a feeling of exclusivity. Like only a few people get this, and then when only a few people get this, no offense to men too, when they feel left out, they want to be part of it. It's human nature for all of us. And so what I've done for every program we've launched is I've started out as an exclusive pilot. And when you exclusively pilot somebody and then you actually get results, people talk about it. And then that's how actually we've grown our wellness coaching program. Ironically, just yesterday, I got this data from our benefits manager. We do a weekly campaign on this Be Healthy, Be Whole stuff. And we were averaging anywhere between 1 and 2, sometimes per week, people emailing back and saying like, oh, I hear about this wellness coaching thing you keep talking about. Can I meet with a coach? And in the last 2 weeks, we've had 16 inquiries for people who have interest in being in coaching. And so we're at that turning point now where people are talking about it. All you have to do from a marketing place is get people to have results. When people feel better, they look better, they act better, other people notice, they start getting compliments, they want other people, they talk about it, and then it just sort of goes from there. I think we had one other question.
Can you talk about the food inflammation test more specifically, and then what outcome data do you have around that?
Sure. So our wellness coaches, we have one who's a registered dietitian, and then our other wellness coach has a nutrition and is certified through IIN, which is one of the nutrition schools out there. And so we all have just a fundamental belief for our own experiences. As I mentioned, I had my own personal experience since being in Bali and other things that we believe food drives results, like better food drives better health. And so we engaged with Everlywell, and also we use the ALCAT test. In some cases, one of our coaches can use that as well. And basically, it's a basic blood test. It gets sent off. People know what foods become inflammatory for them in their systems, and then we begin to help them create dietary choices that are more aligned to their own health. And that's, for us, from a place of results, like people knowing what foods are creating inflammation is then tied directly to lower waist circumference, lower weight, better experiences. Maybe they're complaining they're having bad skin, or they're having mood swings, or other things that we know from the science, and anybody that inflammation is a big source of disease. So that's where we're seeing the majority of our results, frankly, is probably in weight loss, first and foremost, because when people aren't eating the foods that are inflaming them, they're losing weight. And when they lose weight, they feel better, then they're beginning to trajectory for mental health, they're getting out more, they're moving more, and then from there, it's been terrific. So I'll keep going, and I'll make sure I stop toward the end for any other questions that come up. But as you can see from our lens, again, totally different look at the world of well-being. Maybe some of the stuff that you're already doing, but I'll give you some of the things, best practices that we're doing that may help you. As I mentioned earlier, now and in the future, we're doing a lot of different things that are supporting our employees' health and well-being. We have wellness coaching clubs where our wellness coaches, for those people who are maybe not ready for one-on-one, but have an interest, they can join us for some group classes. Now, most of these are just classes, but we name them in such a way that feels exclusive, going back to the idea of getting people to feel like they're part of something. People want to be part of a community. They want to be part of a club. They want to be part of something. So, sending them to a class doesn't do that, but giving them part ownership in a club does. And so we've just changed the way we look and name things, how things look and how they sound, and it's really driven an entirely different kind of result. Book clubs, we have a lot of videos from our CEO, Alan Lazowski. He's open about his experiences with depression. I'm very open as a leader at the C-level with my experiences around anxiety. We talk about it, we share, we're honest, and then it creates a culture where people feel safe to be able to ask for help. And it starts from us at the leadership level. So in terms of best practices and what success really looks like for us, integrating our well-being practices into your leadership development programs. Like an example of that is, are your trainers putting candy out during a session, during a leadership development workshop? If so, maybe that's an easy place that you can make a shift. Offer candy and something else for those people who may need something more healthy, or just not having it in their face. Creating a brand. For us, we said, be healthy, be whole. That's our brand. Everything looks and feels like that. Everything from come work with our wellness coaches or do this challenge to you haven't done your EOI and we need it. Everything comes from the same place, which is this Be Healthy, Be Whole campaign. Our book clubs, we have book clubs, our leadership book clubs that include things around mental, spiritual, and physical well-being. So even if you had a leadership program that's maybe a training program around reading, or a book club, which a lot of companies have now, can you be selecting books that are driving better well-being from a leadership perspective? And a lot of books are out there right now from really high-level, very sophisticated leaders who are talking about this stuff. Like I had on the screen earlier with Brene Brown in her most recent book, Dare to Lead, or Dan Harris has got the book on meditation. And there's a lot of really interesting books out there that are very mainstream and could be a nice alignment. Managing up about setting boundaries. This is probably one of the most critical things that we do for creating success. Our leadership development programs have to include teaching people how to set boundaries, especially for women. It's not easy to do that, and I imagine some of you could relate to that with the time that your boss asks you to stay late to do something, or the time that you have more work than you have time for. This is something we all face. This isn't just LAZ. This is all of you and all of your employees and everyone around. We're all faced with this because of technology. It's creating these work hours that aren't reasonable anymore. And so we have to teach people how to set boundaries and be able to say authentically, if I do this, I'm compromising time with my family. And that's not okay with me because that's part of my health and well-being. And we have to drive cultures that drive that kind of boundary setting, or else none of our health and well-being practices can be as successful as they potentially have, or as they potentially could be. Of course, negotiating insurance, for those of you who are self-funded or even fully insured, if your insurance companies are giving you wellness credits, a lot of times we will negotiate wellness credits. And although they do become part of an admin fee overall, obviously, from the back end, sometimes leaders, and this is something for especially smaller companies, your leaders might see, okay, we're spending X amount of dollars on wellness, but if it's getting credited back to you instead, it's a nice way for you to fund it. Many of you are probably already doing that. Even though at the end of the day, you're still paying for it, it's a nice way for leaders maybe to not see it as a bottom line spend. And then, of course, partnering with your benefits team, or benefits and leadership teams, training teams, if you have them within your organizations, to see, hey, what programs do you have coming out 2020? I wonder where we can get together and align our benefit strategy with our org development or our talent strategy. And employee engagement surveys, another good example. How can you make sure you're asking the right questions on your engagement surveys that are around health and well-being? Those are things that are usually driven by talent or OD, and how do you align them? What about performance reviews? What are you measuring for performance? Is performance measured by how well employees are taken care of or taking care of themselves? So other ways that you can drive that kind of result. The last piece that I will share with you is specifically around questions that you can get your leaders asking. I call these high mileage questions. That's how I learned them. And so that's how I discovered the information I discovered about my story of Marlene, which is just asking high mileage questions and being present. We're all moving in so many directions. We're all on our phones, we're on our tablets, we're being bombarded by information, and it's more important than ever that we bring that human back to work. We teach our leaders to slow down and ask questions like, what does your gut say you should do? Where are you with that? And what's preventing you from getting there? Do you have a gut feeling about this? And if you do, why? Why aren't we acting on it? What does it feel like, you need today in order to be successful or to take care of yourself or to feel whole. You can read them, and there's tons of other ones. But ultimately, what I try to do in my coaching practices, and again, my lens is intuitive coaching. That's my certification where I come from, but is getting people to find their own answers. We know they have it inside them. And slowing down, being present, and pushing them to ask for what they need and assert themselves for the things they need, because overall, that's really what's going to change the dynamic. All right, what other questions can I answer about the work we've done? Hi.
Hello. I have a quick question on communication and marketing.
Okay.
I understand that you have one-on-ones and employees are getting engaged, but how do you get them to understand and pay attention to what the company is offering that could benefit them?
Great question. So we do that in a multifaceted way. Because I was mentioning not all of our employees have email addresses, a lot of them don't have computers. So we obviously email where we can. We have an email campaign that's targeted to different groups per week. So for those who do have email, we do pretty aggressive targeted email campaigns. So for example, we'll take our data. We use a system that allows us to sort of slice and dice the data to figure out, who's potentially going to be, is diabetic or would be diabetic, who's on the trajectory for who needing a particular kind of preventative exam, whatever. So we have these targeted campaigns that go out through email. We also do text message campaigns where people have opted in. We do something called the calling tree, where we leave phone messages for people, automated phone messages, reminding them of different things. We do personal reach outs and campaigns to people. We actually contact, or I should say our wellness coaches, because of privacy, obviously, we're really respectful of that. I don't see person-to-person data, but our wellness coaches do. They contact every employee who has a claim over $2,500. Some kind of active reach out, phone, email, whatever they can find in the system. So we do everything we can to connect one-to-one and or group. And then we do wellness fairs in various markets where, like we just had one in Columbus, Ohio. Last week we'll have one in Hartford. We have one in Dallas. So we do wellness fairs where we have an HR person in the region who's passionate about it. And so we just try to use all the different facets. And then if we have a person in a region who's really successful and willing to tell their story, we ask them to be the champion for well-being in their region. And so that also supports us pretty heavily. I didn't say this earlier, but our team of HR folks is about 55 around the country. So I really do leverage my team as much as possible to drive a lot of the communication. Hi.
Since you have remote sites, how do they access the group classes and the wellness coaches?
Yeah, so all of them are available through mobile or through computer. And so if a person wants to use their personal phone, they can, because we really promote it as voluntary. So if they want to use their personal phone, they can. If they don't have access, we encourage them to ask their manager, because all managers would have access to a computer or phone. So we'll say, if you want to be part of it, we strongly encourage it. And since it's part of our leadership conversation, we'll go to a manager and say, would you like us to help you get your manager to give you access to the computer?
So the group classes are virtual?
Most of them, yeah. Although there are times when we'll offer a class in a region if if a regional HR business partner calls us and says, hey, I got a group of people who are interested, I'll fly our wellness coaches wherever I can. In fact, as an aside, the month of January, we also do our open enrollment slightly differently. We have normal open enrollment, whatever, like everyone does year end most of the time. Then what we do is, instead of having like really big education experiences for open enrollment, we do our education in January and February at the beginning of the plan year. And we really focus it on, now you've selected your plan, now what? How do you find a doctor? How do you make sure you're getting the best quality of care? How do you know if you're overspending? Like all the things we were talking about earlier, we do that education at the beginning of the year after people have made their plan selections. Because what we've learned is no one actually cares about that stuff when they're selecting their plan. They care about how much money it's going to cost and how much it's increased year over year. So we try to change the conversation and allow that more proactive conversation to happen after the dust has settled.
Yes, thank you. Could you talk a little bit more about the inflammation test, the cost, and do they go to LabCorp or Quest, and who initiates that, and who reads the results, and how do they connect with that?
Sure. I think I guess everyone's into this inflammation test. Sorry, I didn't give you more info on it. I wish I would have known. So just to be quick about it, there's a lot of them out there. We were looking for something that people could self-administer, so they don't have to go to a lab or don't have to have a lab come to them. And so we selected Everlywell, and we negotiated pricing with them. I'm sorry, I have no idea how much we're spending. It's between like $100 and $200 each. They're not expensive. And so essentially what they do is they get a kit, it's in a box. So let's say you're in Columbus, Ohio, and you're working with our wellness coaches in Hartford. She's gonna mail you this box, and it's like this big, and they open it up, and it's obvious. You prick your own finger, although if you're me, I had to have somebody else do it because I'm a baby. And you prick your own finger, you put the blood on a card, and you mail the card in, and then you get your results back. And it's supposed to be designed for not a doctor to read it, which is why we selected it. And literally, I don't need anyone to read it. I just look at it. It's like, here are the foods that are making you inflamed, and take them out of your diet for 6 months and see how you feel. I mean, like, it's pretty obvious. But then, obviously, we encourage the conversation with the wellness coach. So Everlywell is one of them. The Owlcat is another one, although that one is not self-administered. You do have to go to a lab for that. And there's a whole slew of others. So we just wanted something that was easy to access. I think we have time for maybe another question or two. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. Thank you for your presentation. It's been great, and
Great.
I love the way that LAZ focuses on their employees.
Thank
So
you.
that's been fabulous. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier in your presentation was cost factors, right? How much cost you were spending from a benefit standpoint on the medical benefits. Now, how long have you been implementing this well-being program that you have? And has that well-being program impacted your expenditures on behavioral health care?
Thank you for asking. So I'd say we're 2 full years into our kind of like really, we're 2 years mature in our well-being programs. I mean, we've been doing things for a lot longer, but I'd say for this kind of stuff, we're 2 years in. And I am proud to tell you that this year we just did our renewal, and it's the first year in the entire time I've been at LAZ and before that we did not see an increase in our max claim liability or in our expected claims or in our stop loss. I mean, so yeah. And we also have an additional 250 people enrolled in the plan 2019 over 2018, and our per employee per month claims cost has gone down significantly. So I don't have that data here with me, but I hope it's just not luck. I mean, you know, I'm always cautious. I said earlier, I'm all about setting expectations, and so I'm super cautious about how I present that so that I don't end up with my wellness coaches getting fired a year later because some crazy high-cost claimant situation ensued, which we all, I'm sure, have experienced. But I do believe that there's a correlation. We've also done a lot of things on plan design. We're driving a lot of people. We've fixed a copay, even though we're self-funded, and all of our plans, we're fixing copays on primary care, we're fixing copays on urgent care, we're increasing the co-insurance on ER. I mean, we're doing the things that you have to do on a plan design perspective too. So I think it's a combination of things, but we have definitely, this is the first year when we've seen an actual neutralization in the increase in cost. I think, you have one
So
more?
you had mentioned earlier that you had aligned yourself really well with an organization that put people first. Have you worked in an organization that doesn't have that culture and tried to implement some of this programming? And if so, what tips or advice can you have, especially at that executive level?
That's a loaded one, isn't it, for a lot of you? For the record, like I've done a lot of sessions in a lot of places on this conversation, and obviously I am very lucky to work at LAZ. If I answered the question yes, and you looked at my bio, you would know where I'm talking about. So I have to be mindful here of how. At the end of the day, I think my answer is yes. I do understand the predicament that there is not everyone being always people over profits, or not all companies in that space. I'll say that I personally don't have a lot of experience in this role because the role that I was in before LAZ was the head of learning and development. So I didn't spend a lot of time in the well-being space. That said, I'm happy. I know we're pretty much out of time, but I'm very happy to spend some time if anyone wants to, like at a break or something, more about how I might address it if it were me and I was using my brain to do that, or I have my cards and we can chat after if anyone has an interest. So I know we're pretty much out of time. I just want to kind of close with a couple of comments, which is, you know, quote on the screen, to change any behavior, we have to slow down and act intentionally rather than from habit and impulse. I think that's what happens a lot, is we're all moving in a lot of directions. We're very busy people. Everyone's very busy, and so as a result of being very busy, we're all over the place. And when we slow down and act with intention and with purpose, it changes the dynamic. And if I can encourage you to do anything and take anything from this conversation, is take care of your people. Be kind, and slow down and know that these are, we all know that they're people, but these are people who need connection. Connection is as important to us and needed in our DNA as food and water and shelter, and people need to connect. And when we connect with each other, it changes the conversation, and I promise you, if you can create connection like this in your organization, you'll change results. So appreciate you guys so much for having me here. Thank you very, very much.